The 6th of November. We are one day before Election Day in several states in the country. And there's always election news. So we'll have some of that tomorrow for sure. Virginia, New Jersey, series of other states, some ballot initiatives. But tonight we bring you a very special guest. His name is Greg Wooldridge. He is a former Navy Blue Angels commander and 2018 Republican gubernatorial candidate here in the state of Oregon. And Greg and I have, I think, known each other for 15 years, actually, because I think we first met in 2008 when you were barnstorming the state on behalf of then Republican presidential candidate John McCain. Welcome to the show, Greg, and good to see you.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, no kidding. That's the perfect shirt. And actually, when you're talking about national security, that's especially important, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But I think it's really cool. It's so good to be with you. And yes, since the McCain campaign in 2008, we putzed around with a lot of good stuff since then. And it's just so good to get back with you and see that you're still hitting it hard. That's awesome. Party.
Yeah, we constantly try to bring a bit of a perspective with an edge because we think that people want to hear kind of what the news means. And boy, I think back to 2020, right? Mm-hmm. And which seems like an enormous amount of time ago in terms of events that have occurred. And there was the president of the United States. There's one job the president of the United States has that is really primarily the president's job, right? And it's to conduct foreign policy and be commander in chief of the military. So national security falls squarely, not solely, but squarely into the wheelhouse of what the president's supposed to be about. And there was one debate that we did not have in 2020. We're supposed to have 3 presidential debates, and the third one was supposed to be about foreign policy. It never happened. And looking back, gosh, doesn't it make sense that maybe that should have happened? Because look what has happened with our national security and our foreign policy since then. 4 years ago, we had peace, we had prosperity, we had really a belief, I think, that we were starting to move, like in places like the Middle East, towards like the Abrahamic Accords, where our historic enemies were really mending fences and forming common cause as friends. Diplomatic relations between Gulf Arab countries that once, conducted oil embargoes and financed military attacks on Israel, and they were establishing diplomatic relations and friendly terms. And then, of course, if you go back 4 years ago, there was a plan to leave Afghanistan, but I think what we saw in 2021, that wasn't the plan. And then we have, of course, what's been happening. And last time you were on our show, I think it was April 25th, as I recall, of 2022, and the war on Ukraine by Russia was still fairly fresh then. And here we are a year later, and it's like a world transformed. And then, of course, we've got China and all of the things that have been going on there in Southeast Asia, the Taiwan Straits, the constant belligerence that's been going on. And when we look back, geez, maybe we deserved more of a debate on foreign policy, given what we've gotten.
Absolutely. We're so far behind the power curve right now with all the events that have happened. And would they have happened had we a different administration? Would Russia have felt empowered to try to overtake Ukraine? Would Iran have felt gutsy enough? That's not a good word because they're not gutsy, but criminal enough to sick their dogs on us, on Israel, when they did on October 7th. So I think had we any idea that our country would be so weak in the face of the world threats, I think the vote would have definitely come out differently. And we've also, of course, now got Taiwan being looked at by China all the time with their overflights and their harassment and taking the South China Sea. They want that whole sea to be theirs for trade routes to Africa and other strategic advantages. So we have to be on top of that. And as we start to disperse carrier battle groups to the Mediterranean to stand by in case a rogue state wants to further this attack on Israel, that we'll be in that fight. But then what happens if the Chinese say, wow, this is our chance? Fortunately, we have an aircraft carrier based in Japan. Few people know that. I think it's from Ronald Reagan right now.
I think it is,
yeah. Deploys out of Yokosuka. And I just had a conversation with the Air Wing commander, a good friend of mine that's a former leader of the Blue Angels as well. And he said, and they were in Manila, so they're cruising, they're out there, so 12 hours, they can probably be in a pretty good position to implement anything with Taiwan. But that's a lot of stuff. Sorry about that.
No. It's a good kind of overview. I mean, I think you were at the Reagan dinner in Washington County, which is on the west side of Portland, for folks watching this who aren't familiar with every part of Oregon and the counties. And this was the challenge coin that they had.
Yeah.
It's the Reagan dinner challenge coin. And of course, this is what Reagan used to talk about: peace through strength, right?
Absolutely.
That is essentially a policy which says that you get peace because no one dare think that they could do something that they shouldn't. And it produces what's known as deterrence. It prevents wars, right? Or it certainly makes people think that it would be extremely costly and therefore they don't bother. It really feels like deterrence has broken down. And if I look back, I don't know if there's anything earlier to look back, but if I look back at what happened in Afghanistan and the way that was handled, it more or less convinced just about every other belligerent potential bad guy in the world that they could try something, and we probably wouldn't be able to handle it anymore.
Well, our commander-in-chief, I don't think is, he's not cognizant of what's really going on, and he defers all those decisions to those that work for him. And when it comes to defense, there are very few that have had experience there, except a good friend of mine who we see on TV all the time, John Kirby, who used to work for me when I was on the Blue Angels, believe it or not.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
90s. Yeah, he was a Navy public affairs officer for me. And I still have a great respect for him, and as does he for me. But other than that, the depth of military and strategic knowledge within the executive branch, I don't think is very, very deep. And when you look at things like the pullout from Afghanistan, how we could have repositioned the airplanes and all the supplies to a different place and done that in a more measured way, defended it right up, to not allow those kind of attacks to come in. So I just part of the
you're talking about Bagram Air Force Base in particular, aren't you? That was the huge
everything to Bagram, right? And that is the essence of the executive branch, in my opinion, is keep America safe, and the safety of those who are not in the country but outside the country. Keep them safe through strength, just like the Reagan expression, peace through strength. And we didn't have an informed executive branch, I don't think, obviously. And we've had a couple other surprises. I think our intelligence dropped the ball on this October 7th. I don't know how the Israeli intelligence let that pass by, but I think there was some problem there. But maybe we weren't asking the right questions, So our military culture has changed too. A lot of things are happening that are not in the right direction.
A lot of people are concerned about the military culture because it seems like sometimes we're more prepared to make sure that everyone's satisfied with what pronouns are being used than they are with, killing people and breaking things, which the military actually is supposed to do when it's absolutely necessary and they have no choice. The belief, I guess it's the belief, is even more important sometimes than the reality, because if you constantly have to prove that you're tough and you can't, and people shouldn't mess with you, That's only because they perceive that they can and that you're not tough. And uh, that's weakness is provocative, just like, strength can produce peace. I'm wondering, when you look across because I remember Kamala Harris was sent. She's a vice president, right? She was sent to Poland just before Russia did decide to invade Ukraine, and she said, "We have them deterred. We've told them in no uncertain terms that we're going to slap them with economic sanctions and blah 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 and blah 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 blah." And then within days, they were actually offering the president of Ukraine an evacuation flight to leave because they figured it was going to last about 48 to 72 hours, and then Kyiv would fall. And here we are much later. Those actions, the failure to be real about what's going on, that how do we restore that?
Get a new executive branch.
Yeah.
I mean,
And even the
really,
new guys have to approve it again, don't they?
yes, that's right. But I also like our new House Speaker. I think he will exercise some authority from that role. He's already done it, and he's listening to the caucus and the Republicans, and so, when we say things like, when it's said within that side of the House that we're not going to let Hamas supporters enter this country in any way. First, we're going to stop clean up the border, right? We don't have any control of that. So there we have ne'er-do-wells, just I almost said sneaking across the border. I should have said strolling across the water. Across the river, not the water, but across the river. So there's a lot of stuff going on that could be much, much better and better controlled. And we don't project the fact that we've got a handle on things. And that's, my goodness.
Well, that balloon, that was another thing. I thought that was more important than people give it credit. They kind of made fun of it, but we looked pretty stupid, and we didn't look like we were decisive. And that was a message we sent to everybody in the world. But worst of all, we sent it to the Chinese Communist Party, which I think if there's anybody that needs to be deterred at this point for our own safety and security, it's probably them.
Absolutely. The CCP is the controlling authority in China. And when you talk about, even in their military, their units have a party designee. When decisions are made in their squadrons and their ships and everything else, it has to be cleared through the party. And their way forward is well outlined and very patient. So we have to be ahead of that, way ahead of that.
And they like to engage in asymmetric warfare too. And what was it? The book that I read years ago called Unrestricted Warfare was written by some of their generals saying, we're not going to just go right at the strength of, the United States or our opponents. We're going to go and probably pull the rug from under them, or do things that they didn't expect that could show up on their own soil. Could be an electrical grid being taken down. Could be, information warfare. And I personally, from what I can see, TikTok is actually helping Hamas right now, which is crazy that we even allow such a thing. That's not free speech any more than, during World War II. It's like, let's let Hitler and the Nazi Party engage in free speech in the United States to undermine the war effort.
Absolutely not. I mean, First Amendment is beautiful, but it can be abused. And when it comes to national security, we have to be careful with that. Very, very careful. And showing the side of us that the world might interpret as being pro-Hamas is not good. And I like all media, though, when that stuff pops, it gets all this attention when it could be 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 100,000 people that are making that assumption or that assertion. And we kind of get drawn into a state of fear, which I think we need to be careful with that too. I think we need to know that the heart of America is not going along with that crud, with the protesting on the college campuses or in the nation's capital or in downtown Portland, in support of Hamas. It's not. How do you counter that? I mean, in reality, it would be get those hundreds of thousands of us that support Israel to counter protest, but that's not what we do. We count on the strength of the government, public policy to help control that wrong. I mean, not control the wrong things. I don't want. It's not thought.
Promote the right thing. Yeah.
Promote the right thing based on fact, right?
Yeah.
Because you get MSNBC and some of those folks popping stuff up there, like the bombing of the hospital, or the
New York Times. New York Times still standing by their false story.
Yeah, and it's been proven without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that we just have to be armed with facts from reliable sources, and not get fearful of a segment of our society like that. We need to know that we can work with that. But it does put a bad look on things, but we can work with that. And that's what I'll go back to the new Speaker of the House. He's all over that stuff, and bless him.
He's well spoken. I've really been impressed with when he got in front of. I saw him interviewed by Sean Hannity, and I'm like, he was reasoned. He was smart. He didn't go off the deep end in any direction. He wasn't vitriolic. Nothing. He just addressed the issues, but then he was also resolute and clear. Like he said, I think at this point, it's safe to say that the Biden presidency is a failed presidency. If you measure it just by national security alone, we've seen a dramatic decline. And there's, of course, many other issues. And you mentioned the southern border, which is also national security, right? And yet they almost don't seem to care. They've got one department, the Department of Homeland Security, that is literally promoting the bridge, the border from being abridged by people that some of which are bringing explosives into the country, is what they discovered.
Yeah, and from all over the world.
All over the world.
Not just Central and South America. They're from all over the world.
Military age males, not just like women and children that are fleeing oppression or organized crime or whatever. It's like these are guys that you got to be really focused on what they're doing. Now, let me ask you, because shifting gears back to the military side of things, one of my biggest concerns that I've noticed is that besides the attitude within the military at this point, if it's attitudinal ready of what they're focused on, what they're emphasizing, there's a lot of stuff about climate change and gender equity, and none of that's going to do you any good when you have to face somebody who's trying to kill you or kill the people you're trying to defend or protect. And are we ready? I look at 100. We've got, well, it's not fully disclosed, but we have a shortage of 155 millimeter shells at this point. And that's weakness. That's provocative. Are our naval forces in the Pacific ready and positioned sufficiently right now to make it virtually unthinkable for China to try and make a move against Taiwan? That's a big question. I think you've actually had the opportunity to evaluate that recently and speak about that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I look at, Kevin, is I've taken a closer and more interested look at the silent service, the submarine force.
Subs, yeah.
We've got SSBNs that have half of our country's nuclear power on them. And I don't mean reactors. I mean the long tubes that deliver bad news.
Yeah.
And so that is the backbone of our strategic force for nuclear war, frankly.
Wow.
But what also is out there are 4 Ohio-class submarines that have been converted, and each of them can carry, I think it's 160 Tomahawk missiles. So I would be willing to bet, I was thinking about that as trying to how would they prepare for war? Asymmetrically, again, they would probably try to knock out the power grid on Taiwan and do a lot of hacking on the intelligence systems. But I think they would also start launching missiles. And I'm sure that of those 154 Tomahawks, I bet there's, and of those submarines, there's at least one nearby most of the time that can target all those missile sites that can reach Taiwan on mainland China. And there's a lot of them. They're ready to go. China is ready to go, and they're not easy to find. They're not easy to see, but I think that's an advantage. Let me go back to what you said about the military. I think, again, there too, we might tend to overreact a little bit. I think we still have the greatest fighting forces in the world. I love the Marine Corps. That's I'm Navy, but the junior service there in the branch of the Navy, the United States Marine Corps, that is the best fighting force across the board in so many different ways in the world. Love those men and women. They're so strong. But to say that the culture of the military is totally changed, I would ask back away from that a little bit. We still have structure. We still have tradition. We still have,
esprit de corps,
hard-knuckled young men and women that have been brought up differently, that understand their role, and they know it from hearing reading. Sorry about that.
Reading happens to me too.
Yeah, of all things, reading. Hang on. There we go. Pass it off. Lateral there. So they're really good men and women still there. Have we gone toward this expression woke in the military? Yeah. But we had started going woke in 2015, 2013, 14, 15. We got a new commander in chief, and he said, no, that policy or that executive order, we're pulling that back. Yeah. So that's my hope for 2024, that when we have a change of regimes in the executive branch, and we get a man in there or a woman that loves America and has conservative values, those kind of silly things are going to be drawn back from our military. They're peripheral to the military, right? I mean, they're there. They make great headlines. They make people just get all roused up. Yeah, but the men and women in the services are awesome. I mean, I spent a year and a half with the Blue Angels and with military folks that were at bases where the Blue Angels were putting on air shows. We're making that movie I mentioned to you, the IMAX movie about the Blue Angels.
Oh yeah.
And I got to witness their dedication, their strength in what they do, their expertise, their professionalism. Now, I don't like some of the things that are going on, but I think, again, it has to do with the executive branch, because the executive branch tells the Department of Defense, this is what you're going to do. And then if the leaders there don't agree with that, pretty soon they're not there anymore. And that's an issue too, from the teen years, the 20 teens of our country, the early 20 teens, where things really started to change, and appointments and promotions were made that favored a less strong approach to defense.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned about how a change in leadership can make a difference. I think about what was going on if you go back to 2013, 14, 15 with ISIS, a word that we barely hear anymore, because back then, President Obama said they were the JV team, right? Believe it or not, there was a guy who was overseeing the withdrawal of troops from Iraq at that time on behalf of the State Department, one Anthony Blinken. He wasn't Secretary of State then, but John McCain, our good friend John McCain, actually pointed out in the hearing, it's like, why are you even here trying to be offered up as for a new role? You did that. And so, but then we got a different president who, after all these people just kind of messing around and being micromanaged by a bunch of people out of DC or the State Department, even worse, President Trump went and said, you know what? Get rid of them. I want it done. Right. And then I think in 18 months, they were basically almost gone. And now there's a group there that stays and just makes sure the remnants don't come back. That's what could happen if you had an actual change in leadership. You could actually defeat a vile opponent like that,
Yeah.
end the threat, and go back to a more peaceful situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And count on our allies over there. You mentioned that in the Arab world, there are countries that were all tied in and happy with the Abrahamic Accords,
Accord.
right?
Yep.
And just since October 7th, I've seen pronouncements from Saudi Arabia and from the United Arab Emirates that let's press ahead with those accords. We want peace with Israel. We want to see Israel survive. And that is a great sign in my book, right? So it's not like the whole Muslim Arab world is coming down on and coming along with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. They are rogue actors. They really are, even in the Muslim, the Islamic world.
Well, I think that's where we see that the Middle East is starting to. There are a couple of different sides to the Middle East, and then there's some people that are sort of in the middle, trying to figure out where they're going to align themselves. But Iran is on one side, and they have their proxies and their client states, like Syria is a client state, right?
Right.
And they have their proxies like Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And
Yep.
lo and behold, they all seem to be connected. And that might explain why many of these Arab countries that are concerned about the threat that Iran presents, and the fact that they actually want to have prosperous countries, not ones where they're all blowing up each other's oil facilities
Right.
and sinking their tankers. It is a great concern what's happening with Iran's nuclear program, how that's going to be dealt with. But maybe I think that had something to do with the Abrahamic Accords coming into being, right?
Yeah.
They
Well,
the Gulf Arab countries realized they had a better friend in Israel than they had in Iran.
Who created, who promoted, where did those accords begin? When did they begin?
Well, you could trace it probably all the way back to Egypt and Sadat as some of the first steps, and then King Hussein. But yeah, I guess.
But during the Trump administration is when Jerusalem, we relocated our embassy to Jerusalem,
We
correct?
recognize Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it was those 4 years where so many things were begun and unfortunately not had a lot of them came to fruition, but some didn't after 2020. And that's again, I wish America could see that, and of course you've got the real blatant things like the border crossings and the price of gasoline and the economy. There are a lot of things that don't reflect well on how the country's being run now.
No, and that's a great point about how this traces back to recognizing Jerusalem, which they said if you do that, well, then all the Arabs will hate you and you'll never have peace. Lo and behold, we end up with peace. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And it was President Trump. He had Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who kind of led that effort, as well as the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Some really smart professionals who knew how to use both diplomatic strength and then also the understanding that military alliances matter, and standing up and deterring people like the mullahs in Iran can make all the difference. And I guess that's where we're a little concerned now, is that it seems like the Biden administration wants a deal so badly with Iran that they have bent over backwards. And somehow I think they still think that that Russia is like this great mediator for them with Iran. And that is absurd at this point.
Think about this, Kevin. I just thought of this. Back when President Trump was in office, the youngsters, the youth of Iran had a voice, and they were saying, we don't like the way our country's going. And now I think Iran feels totally set free to punish and knock those voices down, right? And not allow them to speak up and have rights that they should have as a free country, which Iran, of course, isn't.
Well, what's the old saying? Uh, uh, Tyranny is when the people fear the government. Liberty is when the government fears the people.
Yeah.
Uh, and I
Right.
think that almost describes what the contrast between before and after in Iran. There, and that's a country that has a lot of people that would sure like things to be different, but they're in a authoritarian military
Yeah.
dictatorship
And
with
they
led
don't
by
let,
some pretty crazy people.
if they do have protests, the Republican Guard there doesn't let that news get out. They don't want the world to know that there is a dissatisfied populace in Iran that doesn't want to be destroyed, by the silliness. Silliness again, not a good word. By the vicious things that the people that are leading that country are trying to
The
accomplish through
mischief,
the
basically,
court.
the international mischief they're engaged. Well, and there's a guy named Soleimani who's not with us anymore that
Uh,
when they started messing with American citizens,
yeah,
they knew that there was a president who would take action, and he did.
yeah,
And boy, did Iran start to alter its behavior because that's what they understand,
yeah,
and that's why we're always in this situation from one. And I guess the rest of the world must get a little tired of this. The wind blows one direction, then it blows another, and when we shift directions, it's like a hurricane force wind affects
yeah,
the rest of the world.
yeah,
While I think there's a lot of countries that they have a lot more at stake at what happens in the American presidential election next year than they do in their own elections, as
yeah,
far as their own peace and security.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When you get a conservative Republican leading the greatest country on earth, those values of liberty and justice uh, exude from the United States. And when there are heinous things going on around the world, we will exercise our opinions and, as necessary, take care of American people around the world too, and help countries that are being attacked by rogue states.
Reinforce allies, etc. Well, let me
That's right.
circle back now to what you see with Asia and Taiwan, because there's a lot that's changed in just a few years. I believe the Philippines, who used to be kind of on the fence, they have decided to almost rejoin the United States in a
Yeah,
strong
yeah,
alliance because of the
yeah,
behavior of
yeah.
China. We've seen Australia, and you mentioned about the silent service.
Hmm.
As I understand it, they're going to be acquiring some U.S. nuclear submarines, and I
Right.
think they're attack submarines.
Yeah, it ticked
And
off the French a little bit because
it
they
did tick off the
originally had a
French.
deal with the French,
Hey,
and
can't,
now they've come our way.
I don't
So,
know. Sometimes I worry a little bit less about how ticked off the French are when I think
uh,
back to, I don't know, the early 2000s and Freedom
yeah.
Fries. But anyway, um, but I think also that was a demonstration of the level of seriousness that Australia felt, because when they dared question whether the origin of, say, COVID-19 was Wuhan, and they said, we want an investigation. And China said, well, then we're not going to buy your coal. They're like, well, then we're going to go get some nuclear subs. And how do you like that? And I think that they know that each one of those countries is pretty vulnerable. But if they're in an alliance with the United States, both the United States and those countries are safer. And I think of Japan, as well as South Korea. So South Korea and Japan haven't always been on good terms, even though they are close allies of us. Sometimes that was the main thing they had in common, right? They seem to
Yeah.
be talking to each other now, and Japan is taking their defense very seriously in increasing their spending.
Their
Because
budget,
isn't
their
it true, if
percentage.
they attack, if Taiwan's attacked, Okinawa is going to probably be in the crosshairs right there.
Yeah. Well, the Japanese have taken, like you said, a bigger percentage of their GDP now for defense. And I think they realize that they need to be aligned or allied. I wouldn't say aligned because they weren't going to be aligned, but allied with South Korea. And
Mm.
South Korea, of course, has this cultural dislike for Japan, if you want to soften it a little bit, because of World War II, the things that happened there. But they see their survival as being threatened by what China can do. And um, trust me, in my opinion, I think China's the biggest threat to security in the world. If you look at all the economic investments they're making throughout not only Africa, but South America and other countries to get a foothold and to extract vital minerals from those countries and have them loving China for the money they're bringing in, right? Because China is fairly prosperous. That to me is a big worry. And again, the South China Seas and the routes through the Indian Ocean from Africa are important to China as they continue to build their empire. What are the roads called that the famous the road in China?
The belt and
Yeah.
the belt and loop or something like that.
Yeah. And that's what China's trying to do with the whole world. So we need to just make sure that they don't take over places that would be a disadvantage to us and give them incredible stranglehold on the world. I can't read the comments coming in. I hope you can. Because I don't have my glasses on. But if there's stuff that we need to address, if people are asking.
Well, so a lot of them are saying that we need to still pray, and I think that's always wise. Ultimately, a lot of stuff. There's a reason why they have chaplains in the military, because there aren't any atheists in foxholes. But it seems like they're concerned. Bobby Richardson says her husband served 20 years in the submarine service.
Nice.
And and you've been requested to run for president or governor, Bobby, as well. And a thank you for your service, by the way, from Lori, one of our super fans. There's a concern about people like Rashida Tlaib and some of the people in Congress who have taken a position which sounds like that they're actually for genocide of Israel, and promoting the false information. And as you said, we can beat false information with true information. We have to be we have to win the propaganda war, right? We can't just sit there and
that's a great point. That's a great point, because it is propaganda, and it's not widely held thought that genocide should occur in Israel. That's fringe, it's lunatic, it's fanatical. It's not the way God meant for his earth to be, right? And when you look at the founding of our country, Judeo-Christian principles, and I'll just digress for a second, but you look at what they were bringing in the 1670s, 1800s, and the principles that they carried forth. It's so different now. But if we'd stayed with that attention to who really gave us a beautiful place to live and freedom and liberty, and through leaders like Abraham Lincoln and even all the way up to Ronald Reagan. So we've just gone off course. I'll just have to keep going back to saying we've got to fix it in 2024.
We do.
Up and down the ballot. I mean, we love to get some changes here in Oregon. I love what you're doing with the 4th district, and I know we've got people from all over the world, but I think Monique is a great candidate, and we have some opportunity there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is I think great Americans step up in times of challenge, and and that's because we've seen times in the past where it seemed pretty dark. I think there were parts of the Civil War or even the Revolutionary War where we were losing battles, we were losing people. It seemed like maybe this is not going to have a good ending, and then the right people for the right moment stepped forward, and of course, I think one of the reasons why there's such great respect and admiration for people who serve in the military is that I think folks know intuitively that we are the beneficiaries of people who, what the saying went, all gave some and some gave all, and yet it's almost like a decadence that we can have a Rashida Tlaib or somebody like that scream the things they do, but our country doesn't fall to pieces over that.
You marginalize that. I mean, we know that that's radical. That's not what America is. That's not the way this country was founded. That's not that thinking is not a guarantor of liberty like the
Yeah.
rest of Americans think. That's a guarantor of hegemony and just dictatorships and um, inability to exercise First Amendment, which they take to an extreme. So they're going to be there.
No, that's right. And the pendulum's gonna swing and the country's gonna bounce back. I always love the saying from Winston Churchill. He said, "We can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they tried everything else."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
we're probably doing a bunch of that under the Biden administration, and we're gonna do the right thing, I think, here coming soon. But it does mean it's a do-it-yourself country too. I always like to say that because I've lived in some other countries. I'm sure you've
Yep,
traveled a whole bunch.
yep,
Some countries, they sit around and wait for people to tell them what to do. They don't take matters into their own hands and realize that freedom's their job too. That is what's great about our country, that we do
But
that.
what you just said was crucial in how this country is run. People, can I pick on Portland?
Sure.
People want
Please.
the government to do everything. When I lived in the South, in the panhandle of Florida, we'd have hurricanes and trees would come blowing across the roads. Well, Bubba, and I say that in a very loving way, but
Endearing, yeah.
we in Florida, we'd get our chainsaws out and we'd open that road. We don't wait on government. But you see the things that happen okay, I'll get real picky here, Southeast Portland and areas like that, where it's all about the government, what the government can do.
Yeah.
But then it's all about the government, what the government's, how to pinprick the government and knowing they're not going to get in trouble for it. So it's out of control. But when you have Rashid and AOC and those folks, just don't try not to pay them too much attention, but don't let them get a foothold on public policy
Yeah. That's
and
the thing.
change the fabric of our great country.
Yeah, we can't leave a vacuum, because that's
No.
often filled by some of the ne'er-do-wells who have really bad and sometimes provably bad ideas, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like we're learning the whole socialism communism lesson over again right now, and I think that's why the biggest battle to come is going to be 2024 over what the future of the United States is going to be, since it affects so many other things so dramatically.
And like you said, it affects the whole world.
Yeah.
What happens in America affects the whole world and gives people the strength in other countries to say, I want to live like Americans live. I want our country to be like America in its freedoms. Now, then you look at Europe and you go, well, maybe they've gone too far. But but people, you saw that though in things like Brexit and wanting to take back identities of countries like France, where it's just been overwhelmed
Yeah.
with immigration, with people that have thoughts that aren't liberty based. They want to have all the power and have everybody live exactly like they live. And so as we get strong, like we did under President Trump, the world, like you said so poignantly, Kevin, gets strength from that when they see that liberty is being kept intact in the United States.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like we're only one generation away in terms of liberty from extinction. That was Ronald Reagan that said that. And that's
Absolutely.
why we have to be vigilant constantly. One of the comments here from Lori is that a new attorney general would be a great beginning. Level
He's
and
a great
fair
guy.
justice for all.
He's a great guy. I've talked with him, chatted with him. He's taken.
You're speaking of Will Lathrop.
Will is a fantastic man. He takes care of people. He was on the cutting edge of getting away from child slavery, right? He's been fighting that battle, and he has a strong sense of moral right. And I would love to see him as the new attorney general.
Well, and that's why if we fight for our system, that's actually one of the great strengths is that it's self-correcting. Mistakes
Mhm.
are made. Here in Oregon, we've had what I think really turned out to be a mistake based on a deception. People are really realizing it now. Is Measure 110. It was put on the ballot with a deceptive description, which said that we're going to tax cannabis sales to fund substance abuse treatment. We didn't get that until very recently. The very first expenditures to actually produce any treatment have, but for 3 years since it passed, we have seen a skyrocketing um, of the decriminalized hard drugs
Oh,
such as
yeah.
fentanyl and crystal meth, which are just gutting out our cities and unleashing both homelessness. Um, to a great extent, it's responsible for what we've come to recognize or call homelessness, and then also there's a crime wave which is related to it
Right.
that's engulfed our cities and transformed them. We can fix all that, but we also have to say, that was a mistake.
Yeah, it was. Let me ask you this, Kevin. What do you think? Do you think that there is um, a cottage industry formed around getting things like that passed where, okay, now our business that we pretend or that we have says we are going to help with the drug abuse and help get people back in, but it's going to take like for each of those people we treat, we're going to need $100,000 for each one of those. I'm making stuff up. The same thing happens with homelessness. We don't address the problem. We let profit-based organizations get involved. Um, yeah, we've got a major problem there,
I think you've
and
got a point.
it's turning back a little bit.
Yeah.
Not much.
Yeah, I think that you've got a point there is that almost no one gets more money, gets more tax money allocated to them by solving the problem of homelessness. They
Yeah,
pretty much get more when the problem grows. And then
yeah,
when Oregon becomes this destination or magnet for everybody who wants to flourish in a lawless, decriminalized society where it doesn't seem like you can do anything about it,
yeah. Well,
then that's turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry, some of which is busy building homes for people who are incapable of
right.
maintaining a home. I don't even know what affordable housing means to a person who spends all their time doing meth and fentanyl.
Yeah, yeah, and bring that into a social environment where you've got other maybe a few people that really do need that, that structure to help them get out of there and get a shower and get a job, apply for a job and start to get back into society. But you have people that don't want to be there and they're just laying, on the sidewalk in front of this beautiful, expensive building that was built for the people without homes. Um, it's you can't. It's just not going to work. I had a friend that went to Miami. He said, and he came back. He said, "You know what? I was in Miami, and Miami's a pretty wild place, but I never saw homelessness like we have here in Portland." I said, look, Florida has some pretty strict drug laws,
Mhm.
and when you have no drug laws, well, there's some, like in Oregon and in Portland, this becomes a mecca. This becomes mecca for just going there and getting stuff for free and doing all the drugs you ever want to do and just float through life, and
And then inflict all of the consequences on the society around you as you engage in this lifestyle, which is not good. I don't see how it's charitable for people that
look,
are doing drugs to
yeah,
be encouraged to just continue doing them and being given a
yeah,
subsidized lifestyle to continue it. That doesn't sound like it's very charitable.
yeah, yeah. Churches are doing a lot of good stuff, and praying is, of course, important. Um, what one of the offshoots, it's not an offshoot, it's a direct consequence of what's going on in Portland with homelessness and the degradation of our downtown is major companies are moving away. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at retail rental space or office space, even in downtown Portland, it's bottomed. It's dropped to the bottom because nobody wants to be downtown. And those it goes back to what you said, the issue of uh, uh, Measure 110 and the decriminalization of drug use has had an incredibly bad effect.
Well, and then of course, the treatment of law enforcement, the defunding that took place.
Mm.
This is the kind of thing that it all has consequences. It takes time and it's hard to fix. It seems like we've become the poster child here in Oregon and particularly in Portland for what not to do to the rest of the country. But also, we've got to realize it and fix it here. It's interesting. One thing about both fentanyl and P2P meth. That's the version that remember when they banned or made it very difficult, rather, to purchase
Yeah.
the cold medicine because it had an element that you could use to produce meth in your
Yeah.
basement or your kitchen, right?
Yeah.
And that scaled back the problem for a while, and then it just went to south of the border, and they figured out how to come up with another ingredient that
Yeah.
actually made the meth even like much worse. It turned into like super meth.
Yeah.
And those chemical precursors for that and for fentanyl it's being manufactured in Mexico and brought across that border, which is completely porous.
Yeah.
But those chemical precursors are coming from a place that also seems to be behind um, the belligerence that we're experiencing on national security in Asia. It seems like
Yeah.
China is behind
Yeah.
this. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of part of the unrestricted warfare, isn't it?
Yeah. This asymmetrical, right? Yeah. Unrestricted
Yeah.
asymmetrical warfare that hits you in different directions that you haven't. You go, what? I thought we had tanks that could stop that. I thought we had
Yeah.
armored vehicles. So the term asymmetrical warfare certainly applies. How do we get a handle on that? But let's go back to the big picture again. It's public policy and who gets to make those decisions and who has the values and the love of this country that will make that decision for the majority of the people in America. We respect those in the minority and their ideas and what their actions to a point, as long as they don't interrupt what the majority would like to do as far as bad actions.
Well, let me ask you, there's one other thing that comes to mind too that's been really big. We're all talking about AI now. And we're talking about,
Mhm.
there's one of the real important things to the United States is that we've had this technological advantage that we've, for the most part, maintained for, since World War II. We've generally been ahead in most categories of advanced weapons, surveillance,
Mhm.
and computer systems that would allow us to defend the country and to defend our allies and to protect our own infrastructure or many things like that. Now, there's some question as to whether or not we can maintain that.
Mhm.
And I wonder what, from your point of view, seeing how this works. I mean, we've got jet fighters that are certainly more advanced than
Yeah.
ones that you saw when you first probably were being trained to be a pilot.
Yeah.
Can we maintain that edge?
I was
And then what's the effect of AI? Is it going to do something to change how we operate?
I was trained when the men and women were made of steel and the airplanes were made of wood. So anyway, yeah, thanks. And no, that's not true. But things have really evolved, and what we have now is just incredible. And how we use it is the question. How we use it and how we protect that knowledge and that basis of advantage. How do we protect that? How do we keep it from going to China and where they can, they just go after something, and when they can build a building, a skyscraper in less than a year. I mean, they have the ability through the work of the CCP a lot of
Yeah.
times to do anything they want to do, not so much at the benefit of the people, but for the state.
Yeah,
So
they don't
yeah,
have a
AI,
multi-year appropriations process, right? They kind of just
yeah,
do it.
and the environmental issues don't exactly come into play either in China. So
Right.
the big they how many coal plants did they make in the last year? When our Obama and Biden both said we're going to shut down every coal burning electricity creating plant in the United States eventually. Well, that's not reality. And China certainly doesn't do it. They're not being, what was it, the Paris Accords, right? They just thumbed their nose at that.
Energy is really important, isn't it? I mean, we're an energy superpower, or we can be, and that could really do a lot to help maintain our security. Because without energy, you don't really have a lot of these other things we think that you
Yeah.
should have as an
Well,
advanced country.
and you don't have all the electric cars you want to have.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
plus you can't afford any of them as
yeah,
a result, because if you can't afford the electricity,
yeah,
and energy is behind every single product and service that is
yeah,
dispensed.
yeah, especially in defense, and we were a lot of NIMBYs, right? Things like nuclear power. Nobody wants that plant nearby, but they're proven so incredibly safe now. But
Yeah.
and they don't mess up the environment. If you can't get along with that, we're not really going to be able to power our country if we totally get rid of coal and even natural gas, which is a clean burning. We're over the top on where we're going with the environment. Love the environment. Love that. You go to LA, there's no smog anymore because we created things to keep it out of the air, and it
Yeah.
wasn't so much, these pollution carbon credits, that some of the states have now. That's kind of a joke where if you pay enough money, you can buy one, right?
Bit of a Ponzi scheme, yeah.
That is exactly. So yeah, I mean, so we fight those battles, and we try to pick the right people, elect the right people to do the right thing, and educate. See, and again, like you said, very early in this get together, the media has a stranglehold on information. So what do I use? Wall Street Journal mostly, and some other sources. I try
That's right.
I stay away from either obviously far left, but even far right stuff. I try to steer clear of that, get a more balanced look at what's out there, what's going on.
That's wise. That's great advice. And I think a lot of us kind of wish we could have ended up with a Governor Greg Wooldridge. And there's people rooting for you on this feed for you to go and do that again. But I'm not going to ask you to make any announcements today. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and your thoughts with us, your perspective on what's going on with the military, the challenges in foreign policy, which, as we said, just didn't get enough attention in 2020. And boy, do we have to pay attention to that now, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. As you said, one of your folks writing in said, pray. The power of prayer is amazing. So keep that out in front. Love those around us, but find ways to shine the light of truth through your good nature most of the time, until we have to resort to stronger ways. But it's a challenging time to be in this world, and the polarization of American society and culture is kind of tough too. We need to kind of be positive about changing that back to the good days of Ronald Reagan, for example. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that positive is that powerful word.
Right.
Promote the positive. And well, that's a great way to conclude the show here today, Greg. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and I like that, shining the light of truth on all of the things that we can hold up and make the country better, and our state, even Portland. All these places can be improved
with the influence that you might have. Everybody has some influence on those around you. And let me just say this, Kevin, I don't know if I'm right on all these things, and I'm sure there's people who disagree with me, but I think as the country moves forward, if we keep our eye on the ball and what makes this country good, I think we're going to be successful. So I enjoyed it.
Well, thanks so much, Greg. God bless you. And we look forward to you coming on. Maybe, let's see, 2024 should be an interesting year. And who knows what's going to be going on national security wise, but I know that you'll have your finger on the pulse. And we look forward to the next time we get to have you on. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you to all of you who watch, and please share this show with everyone you can. Don't keep it a secret, because people would love to hear this information, and we know that we come back with shining light of truth. I'm going to be using that, Greg. I'm going to be quoting that right here on this show,
Cool.
and I'll give you full credit for it. How's that sound?
Don't worry about that. No, that's great. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks again. We are all glad to be here, and we're glad you were here, Greg. Thanks again,
for
everyone, and have a great night. And we will see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience. Have a good night.
Thank you.